Hi, I'm Anita Burns, and I wrote the book, The Dough Also Rises. I'm going to demonstrate the basics of how to make bread using one of the recipes from the book. I've chosen Amish bread for you. Amish bread is absolutely wonderful, and it demonstrates all of the things that you will need to know to make good bread. So, shall we start? What I have here is I have 6 cups of bread flour, and bread flour is important because it has a high gluten content, which means that the bread will have a nice, high, stretchy texture. We've got some olive oil and some instant rapid rise yeast. I prefer buying my yeast in great big vacuum-packed bricks like this rather than the little envelopes, because I make a lot of bread and the envelopes just get to be really annoying and really expensive. So I use this. I use instant dry yeast, or sometimes it's called rapid rise yeast, rather than active dry yeast, because active dry yeast has to be proofed before you put it in your bread, which means it's an extra step of putting it in warm water with a little sugar and waiting to find out if it's alive. But instant or rapid rise yeast is more alive than the active dry yeast, so I use that because you can put it right in with the flour. You don't need to proof it or put it in warm water to wake it up. We have some salt. I have honey. Honey is a much better choice, I think, than using sugar. Although you can use regular sugar, you can use molasses, you can use barley malt syrup or agave. So I also have some water. If you're using active dry yeast instead of instant or rapid rise yeast, you do need to have the water at about 110 degrees. If you're using instant dry yeast, you don't need to do that at all. So the first thing we're going to do, now I don't normally use a recipe when I bake bread, so I have the recipe from the book here on my handy dandy little iPad. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put 2 cups of flour in a stand mixer. Now you can do this in a bowl if you want, but I use the KitchenAid stand mixer. I'm going to put the yeast in. If we were using sugar, you would put the sugar in, but since I'm using honey, I'm going to leave that for the wet ingredients to add with that. So we're going to put we're going to put the water in. So we've got the yeast, the water, 2 teaspoons of salt. Salt is absolutely necessary in bread. So if you forget the salt, what you're going to get is a bread that not only tastes terrible, but it's going to rise up in big, gloppy bubbles. And it's just going to be mixing for a little while. And I'm going to pour in the oil. I have this really nice chute for mine. If you don't have this on your mixer, what you can do is take a paper plate and just kind of crease it in half and make a chute. Otherwise, it's like really a pain to get the flour and the ingredients in these kinds of mixers. Now the dough is starting to get a little bit stretchy, looking a little elastic, and I'm going to pour in the honey. I sprayed this measuring cup with a little bit of Pam spray so that the honey comes out easier. Just mixing it a little bit more. Now, although it's not in the recipe, I like to add a little bit of sesame seed because it gives the bread an incredibly good taste. Just pour a little in, maybe 1/8 of a cup, a couple tablespoons, not too much. Okay, the bread is just about ready. And I'm going to start adding the flour now, again, about 1/2 cup at a time. The reason you can't really give exact measurements in bread is because a lot of things will affect the texture or how much water or how much flour is absorbed. You don't want it to be too hard or too soft. Bread that's too soft won't rise up because the yeast will just escape right out of the top. And the bread that's too dense will just be that. It'll just be dense. Okay, I'm going to stop this. Stop this now. Lower it. Sometimes you just have to get in there with your fingers. There's just no getting around it. Okay, if you can see, this is starting to come together. It's still a little soft. All right, there it goes. See how it's starting to ball up around the dough hook? Okay, so we're going to take some of the flour that we didn't use, and you just kind of sprinkle it around, make a big circle with it. Remove the dough hook. You just want to make sure you get enough flour that it doesn't stick to the board. Then take your dough out. Now, some people do what's called a bench rest, where they just leave it for 10 minutes. I haven't really found that makes much difference. So we're going to knead the dough. And if you took it out earlier when it was really soft, you'd have to add flour to the top and mix it in. But we kneaded it pretty much with the dough hook, so it's ready for final kneading. It's just a lump of dough. It doesn't really matter. You pull it in toward you, push with your heels outward. Turn it a quarter of a turn. Push, turn, push, turn, push, turn, and just keep going like this, and you'll begin to feel the dough starting to feel springy under your fingers, almost like, well, they used to say a baby's bottom, but nowadays I think you might recognize it more as a memory foam, and elastic and springy. Now, if you've taken it out when it was really soft, you may have to knead 150 to 200 times to get it to this point. But since we did a lot of the kneading with the dough hook, it won't take that much. You just go until it feels right. And I know you don't know, if you've not made bread much before, you don't know if it feels right. Sometimes you just have to trust your instincts and just go by experience. And each time you make bread, it gets a little easier. My mother taught me to make bread when I was very small, but then I didn't make it again for a long time. And when I started making bread for the first time again, it took me a little while to get the feel of it. Now, when the bread is ready, it'll start sticking to itself. See how it's kind of pulling away? It's still kind of dry on the outside. I don't think we need more flour, so I'm going to kind of push that away, and you just knead it until it starts sticking to itself. Okay, the bread is starting to feel a little sticky on the outside. You may have to put, if it's not ready yet, you may have to just put a tiny little bit of a dusting of flour on to keep it from sticking to the board. And so it's just about ready. This is a really great upper body workout. All right, so see it's kind of sticking to itself now? All right, now I'm turning it over, kind of forming a ball. I'm going to pinch a little piece off and do what's called a window pane test or the stretch test. Okay, about that much. Coat your fingers with flour, and then you're going to push on it between thumb and forefinger until it gets to be as thin as you possibly can, this way. And then take your fingers and kind of stretch it out like that. See how that stretches without tearing? And if you hold it up to the light, of course we don't have the right lights here, but if you hold it up to the light, you can kind of see through it. And that means that the long, stretchy strands of gluten have formed, and that's what's going to make your bread wonderful. Yeah, there we go. Alrighty. If you realize how hard it is to really mess up bread once you have the basics down, you're not afraid of it. Okay, so I have a bowl here, and you can put butter in this, or oil, or Pam spray. I kind of like Pam spray with a little bit of butter on top of the dough, because this doesn't add more oil to the bread. If you get too much oil in bread dough, sometimes it'll get kind of an odd flavor. Okay, so I have some butter here, and I don't know, you can use a pastry brush or paper towel or whatever you want. I just take my fingers because I love doing this. And just rub that butter all over the bread. The next thing you're going to do is cover it with a cloth, or you can use plastic wrap. Some people say always use a cloth because it gives air to the bread. Other people use plastic. I've found it doesn't make any difference at all. Hi, so we're back. It's been about an hour, maybe a little over an hour, and we're going to uncover it and see. Yes, it looks like this has really risen up nice and high. The way you really test it, though, is you have to poke at it. Really poke at it. You know, like the Three Stooges? I mean, don't just kind of touch it. You have to take 2 fingers and just boom. And you can tell it feels like a balloon. And the holes stay, and it starts to deflate. And that's when you know it's really ready. So we're going to spread a little more flour out on the board, and then just take this out of the bowl and onto the board. See how nice and soft it is now? What we want to do is to get all the air bubbles out of this, because if we just put it in a bread pan right now, there are a lot of great big air bubbles in there, and the yeast have pretty much satisfied themselves with whatever surrounding starches there are in the bread. So we want to move them around a little bit and give them some fresh food to eat. So you're going to knead it just a little bit, just to push out the air bubbles, and you can feel it. It starts to get springy again. That's right. Just want to kind of fold it over and get all of those air bubbles out. Now, you can make 2 small loaves out of this, or one like 1 3/4 pound loaf, or you can make 1 giant loaf, which is what I'm going to do because I have a giant loaf pan. Or you can make 1 loaf and some rolls. Now, I know a lot of places would tell you all sorts of fancy ways that you have to make your bread loaf. You really don't have to do a whole lot. I kind of just pat it out into kind of a rectangle and then just start rolling it up like this. You just roll it up like this. So I've got this nice big loaf like this, and I sort of tuck them under. And I'm going to take my pan, and I've sprayed this with Pam spray. And you can just kind of tuck it in, and you can see that it comes about 3/4 of the way up the pan. Now, to keep from drying out, you can coat it with butter or oil, but I like an egg wash because an egg wash gives your bread a nice shiny crust. Egg wash is just a beaten egg with a little bit of water, maybe a tablespoon of water per egg. Just kind of brush it on, and you can also then, because the egg wash makes things sticky, just before you put it in the oven, you can brush it again with more egg wash and sprinkle it with sesame seeds or poppy seeds or whatever you'd like. Okay, I'm going to cover this again, and we're going to let it rise. Now, the second rising goes a little bit faster. This one might be 45 minutes or even a half an hour, depending on what recipe you use. Well, as you can see, our bread has risen up quite a bit. So I have the oven preheated for 375. I'm going to add just another little coat here. Now this has risen up way more than it needs to. Yours probably won't rise up quite this much, but I had a big hunk of dough that I put into this pan. As I said, I like giant bread. I put in just a little more egg wash because I want to sprinkle some sesame seeds over the top. The egg wash acts kind of like a glue, and it'll give it a beautiful shiny finish. Now some people like to take a razor and slash their dough. You know, I've never had any luck with that at all. It just seems to do bad things. So you try it if you want. The instructions are in the book, The Dough Also Rises, but I like them just like this. So I've taken the bread out of the oven. I've taken its temperature. It's 201 degrees, just perfect. The only hard part now is waiting the hour for it to cool before I can cut it and really enjoy. So please look for my book, The Dough Also Rises. Thank you.